Good evening, fellow Plexers. This is a reply to, now I forgot who I'm talking to. This is a reply to Richard. It is too long to type out and to post. So his question to me after we're handling an issue with his Plex server of having his whole series library full of duplicate episodes was based on me telling him that my files were on my Synology NAS and that I love the ecosystem, but I still moved Plex to a more powerful hardware base by using an 11th gen mobile Intel processor in a NUC running an arrayless install of Unraid. Unraid is just for the containers to run. There's a pair of dissimilar SSD drives in it for an Unraid cache pool. There's no storage, and I use the unassigned devices plugin to mount my shares from the Synology NAS. And Plex doesn't care where the media is. We all know that. It can be local to the hardware, it can be on a USB drive, or it can be on a network share someplace else. So basically, this long answer is going to try to answer his question, which is generic. So, the question on the ability to serve up 4K streams remotely is a very generic question that needs to be broken down into multiple answers depending on the individual Plex server's capability and the connection they have to the outside world. Plex has a support document that talks about a high passmark score equating with more ability to software transcode any media, including 4K media. Then Plex has another support document that tells us how a Plex pass unlocks hardware accelerated transcoding on modern NVIDIA GPUs or Intel iGPUs and certain unsupported AMD processors. My i5 1135G7 that's in my NUC is a mobile processor that has lots of power to hardware accelerate tons of streams when needed because of its powerful Iris Xe iGPU. And that iGPU is basically equivalent to the same power a similar 11th gen i5 desktop model would have from the same generation. And I think that would be a UHD 730, 750. I forget which iGPU is in the equivalent desktop version of my processor. I also have a 12th gen i9 in my desktop PC, which is not used as a Plex server, but the iGPU in that system is right on par performance-wise with my NVIDIA 3060 GPU when I use either in Handbrake to convert videos. I can take 7 or 8 instances of Handbrake and maybe take a high bitrate 1080p H.265 video and convert it down to a more manageable H.265 copy using the default settings of Handbrake for the NVENC 1080p H.265 conversion. And I can load 7 or 8 of those up simultaneously and just keep starting the next one. And I go back to work on my PC. There's no effect on my PC whatsoever. All I hear is my GPU fan spin up a little bit. I can minimize all those conversions, and when the fan quiets down, I know the last one's finished. So I just imagine that i9, the 12th gen i9 in the system, or my 3060 card used in a Plex server, either one would be great for transcoding any media, including 4K. If you ask how many direct streams I can serve up, the answer depends on the bitrate of each individual stream, which could be anywhere for 4K media between 20 megabits per second or 100 or even 130 megabits per second. And even that's a point of conjecture, because if you have multiple versions of the same movie, from the Plex client interface, you can choose which version to play. I have media that I've shown in other videos. A recent one, Plex reported this 4K version of, it was either the Magnificent Seven or A Christmas Story. Plex reported that as being, I think, 98.2 megabits per second. But when the video was started and direct playing, the client app reported the bit rate significantly higher. So Plex takes an average bit rate, and maybe the client app displays the maximum bit rate it might need, and a movie with a lot of dark scenes versus one with a lot of light scenes, that'll affect the bit rate of a movie. If you make a conversion of two movies that were all original quality to the same converted, let's say H.265 at the 1080p level, the resulting bit rate will be different between those two, even if the original bit rates were about the same. Well, maybe not. No two movies have the exact same bit rate, because the amount of light and dark in a scene determines where the bit rate might be. So there's a lot of things to take into consideration. But I can do a lot on those modern GPUs or CPUs. So my server, even on that little NUC, the mobile version of an i5, my server really has no limit to how many direct streams it can serve up to my family and friends. And with the media that I keep on my server, I'm very unlikely to saturate my gig fiber outgoing connection.
You have an informational message.
Excuse me, my phone's talking to me. My series library is a mixture of 720p and 1080p media. Maybe half of it is H.264 and the other half is H.265. And the bit rate can be anywhere between 3 and 4 or 5 megabits per second to 10 or 11, 12 megabits per second. That really just depends on the series you're watching. My movie library is someplace between 3 megabits per second and maybe 7 or 8 megabits per second. It's mostly all 1080p H.264. But if you can't find something, there's some H.265 thrown in there. There's some 720p versions of movies that weren't available in 1080p. And there's also some 480p versions of movies that there just was no better copy to grab. So all my stuff is fairly easy to stream, and I'm lucky to have my gig fiber connection to just stream it all direct stream. I only transcode audio to certain client devices. I am not a fan of Roku devices or Samsung TV, the proprietary apps. Those are the only clients with my 20 family and friends who transcode. And generally it's always an audio transcode. They're still direct streaming my easy to stream media from the video portion of it. I have an older Roku Ultra that I picked up just to test with, to prove or disprove people's opinions of that device, basically. And if that's in my bedroom or on my office TV where I don't have a sound bar or an AV system, it always transcode maybe 50, 60%, 70% of my media just from the audio side. Currently, it's hooked up as an extra device next to my NVIDIA Shield Pro on my living room Sony, a 2022 OLED, and it never transcodes the audio because my old-ass Vizio soundbar from 2015 now makes that Roku compatible. So that's something with users. None of us get to choose the streaming devices our users have. I recommend everybody to get rid of their proprietary Samsung app or the Roku. but not everybody listens to me. If somebody's using a Samsung TV and they're constantly buffering and they think it's my server's fault, I basically get to the point, look, either go buy an ONN second-gen Google TV device from Walmart for $20 or stop watching my server and watch Netflix and Hulu instead. And those people will say, well, I can watch better streams on each of those than your server. Well, the regular rube has no idea how compressed any of the media is on those other streaming services. My server is all uncompressed media, even though it may not be the highest quality as your server. The only limitation to being able to get that stream through is bandwidth and client app compatibilities. So really, with a gig connection and the level I serve at, I don't really have a limit. Now, I might have a limit with 4K media. You got to remember, transcoding is a fail-safe feature and not something any end user would prefer, because it's a degraded viewing experience from the media they're trying to watch in its original format. It's better to watch a degraded version than to not watch any. But if that stream is already direct playing, no one chooses to force a transcode because it's a worse picture. So some people argue that fact with me, but no one forces a stream into transcode when they're the end user and the original stream is streaming fine. That's a fallacy. Nobody wants to do it. So yes, it is a good feature from the server owner's benefit and the client user's benefit if that's the only way to get the stream through. But it's not a feature we purposely want to have on. It's a feature we want waiting in the wings to come in like a superhero to save our asses. So that's an argument I get in with a few people once in a while. Transcoding is not a desired feature. It's a desired failsafe. It's a failsafe you don't want to live without, but you never want to turn transcoding on when you don't have to. So the goal is to always take all of your own constraints and your strengths into consideration to build a hardware platform that works for you as an individual Plex server owner. I upgraded to a better iGPU with my NUC really just to do it and to learn more. I learned a lot about Unraid, and I actually thought Unraid was mentioned too much because I had a wonderful experience on my Synology NAS. Unraid is a fantastic Docker host platform. It's better than Docker on my Synology NAS. I happen to think sharing media, sharing files across a network, it's better on a Synology NAS than an Unraid NAS. But Unraid comes close. It's pretty good in that area too. And it's so much easier to set up than a Proxmox or a TrueNAS server. Night and day. There's all kinds of videos out there that take you start to finish with a Plex server under Unraid. Lots of them. I dare you to find one or two for either the Promox platform or the TrueNAS platform. I'm sorry, Proxmox. Proxmox is a fully virtualized system. It doesn't come with a file server. You have to install Proxmox and then decide whose file server you're going to install virtually. It's not a bare metal file server. It's all virtual. So this is a different headspace to be in than a simple media server. And I'm not knocking anybody that masters it. I'm not smart enough to take the time and figure out a Proxmox server to then install a Linux server file server, or maybe use TrueNAS as the file server in Proxmox, and then figure out how to share that and get a container going and all this jazz. Unraid is just stupidly easy in comparison. So anyway, the goal isn't to transcode as many streams as you want. The goal is to make things easy for both yourself and your users. But each individual server owner is going to have different weaknesses and different strengths. I've got gig fiber internet. It costs me $90 a month. I'm locked into that price. They say forever, but who knows? Maybe in 4 or 5 years, they'll have 2.5 or 5 gigabyte service over here. And maybe the 2.5 gigabyte service will be about the same price as now as they roll out 5 or 10 gigabit. I'll have to rethink my local network. I've got a 24 port TP-Link switch in the basement, a fast switch, a gig switch. My basement is unfinished. I've got one mesh router plugged in down there to the ONT in the basement, and I've got one on my living room wall. Well, maybe I'll be updating onto a mesh system that has fiber connections on it. And I don't know where I'll find a 24 port switch that has fiber connections, but maybe I'll break things down into 2 switches to get fiber connections on the main switch to then serve certain areas off the slower switch. We don't know where the future is going to take us, but eventually I know I'm going to have faster local networking infrastructure, and eventually I'll have faster web connections too, a faster connection to the outside world. And I can't worry about that. I'm not going to buy equipment now for that day. I'll wait for that day to come and then get a little old so the equipment becomes cheaper, because what I'm doing now already serves my need. But the long story short is I'm set up with fiber. Some people have a faster connection than I do, and these other poor Plex server owners are stuck with Comcast or Spectrum, and they're in an area that hasn't been updated yet, and they may still only have 14 megabits per second for a speed test on their outgoing connection on a good day. Those people are not sharing 4K media, even if it's all transcoded. 14 megabits per second as a speed going out isn't going to do it. So those people are lucky to share lower bit rated 720p media. So none of our servers are equal. None of them can be. And our servers need to be built around what we have for bandwidth and what we have for capabilities to reach the outside world. So my upgrade to the NUC was more of a vanity project that turned out so well. It's like, holy crap, this is our little rocket ship of a Plex server. But again, because of my bandwidth, I am not having to transcode my regular media to anybody. And my middle son moved to a new house, and he's got Spectrum. It's over coax, but it's gig incoming service, and I think he gets like 35 megabits per second for a speed test for outgoing service. He mostly watches my server from his office. He's got a very large 4K monitor, Windows PC. I can't convince him to run Linux like his dad, and he uses the Plex HTPC client app for Windows, and he's the only one I share my 4K media with. It's not a large library, about 120 titles, compared to the 6,500 in my mostly 1080p library, but certain videos look better on his system from 4K, so I share what I've got. He's the only one I share remote media with. So that was a vanity project to upgrade my iGPU, and of course the i5 processor completes scanning tasks and detecting intros and credits about twice as fast as the 9th gen Celeron processor in my newer Synology NAS where my media is stored. But when it takes 3 minutes to detect a season of one TV show for end credits and stuff like that versus 7 minutes, what kind of time am I really saving, especially when I'm not sitting there watching that stuff happen? you've got to sit there with a stopwatch to even see the difference. So let's see, what else do I have to blather on about? So again, I only transcode to a few people using Roku and Samsung TVs, and it's always the audio portion. But sometimes those transcodes cause those streams to buffer on those poor fools. And I've talked to a few people out of the Roku devices, and I can't talk the rest of them out. And again, it's not just an issue that's solved by getting rid of the Roku. They can buy an AV receiver or a soundbar, and that'll solve their audio transcoding issues that's then causing buffering on their low-powered Roku devices. But a $20 second-gen O&N device from Walmart is a lot cheaper than a soundbar. And if they don't want a soundbar in the first place, they're certainly not going to buy one to solve an issue that they think is my server. So users can be a royal pain in the ass simply because they think they're getting high quality from Netflix or Hulu. And they assume that that's more quality than what they're getting from my Plex server, when that's not always the case, but you can't convince them of what's actually going on. So bandwidth is huge. And then you have to take into consideration the incoming connection of your users. There's some people using T-Mobile Home Cellular because that's all they got. I have a buddy like that. He luckily gets between 80 and 100 megabits per second on a speed test. He lived out in the country and he was lucky to have Spectrum at 100 megabits per second, and he was like waiting for them to upgrade that to 300, and it just seemed like it was never going to reach him. Even though they ran brand new fiber infrastructure down a main thoroughfare about five miles from him. He just thought he'd never get past that. Well, he moved someplace a little further out, and there's no Spectrum, there's nothing, but he's got a decent T-Mobile signal on his cell phone, so he tried the home cellular option, and he's not competing with bandwidth from anybody. He's just lucky to have a tower nearby, so he streams perfectly fine off my Plex server with my easy-to-stream media. I can't share 4K media with that guy. He doesn't have the bandwidth to get it. Nor does he own a TV capable of 4K, which is another thing. Maybe I have the most unusual friends and family in the world, but out of my 20 friends and family, I maybe have 10 that are regular streamers all the time, and the rest stream occasionally. I might have 5 users who have 4K TVs. I have one friend, she's streaming on a 24-inch little TV in her living room and thinks nothing of that. Why, we had a 25-inch console TV when I was a kid. What's wrong with a 24-inch LCD? Like, nicest person in the world. I love her to death. But that's just her mindset, and she sits down and watches a movie about once every 2 or 3 months. She's just not into this, and she works it on her Fire Stick. She enjoys the occasional movie. You'd be surprised how many users don't have the equipment that we as Plex servers might have at home to enjoy our own media. So asking how many 4K streams anyone's server can pump out isn't really a question anyone can answer unless they test each and every client device that their users have. Every iGPU or CPU will have a limit to transcoded streams, but the reasons you don't hear about that talked about all the time in groups like this is because there's no sense to many server owners to share 4K media in the first place when it's just going to be transcoded to a lower quality and cause extra resources to be used on their server. And if your particular situation causes you to need or want to transcode all your 4K media down to 720p at a 2 or 4 megabit per second bitrate level, does it really make sense to be doing that? Or should you also have copies of that media that's easier to stream. So again, I have like 120 4K movies on my server and almost 65 regular movies or 6,500 movies in my regular movie library that's shared with most people. I can't afford the hard drive space to have everything that could be 4K be 4K. That's an expense in its own right. If that's your jam for your own media, well, go with a theory that some people say that hard drive or the price per storage unit has never been cheaper. My wallet's not that big to make that theory prove the case for myself. I'm already into Plex pretty deeply. I've got 5 16 terabyte Iron Wolf Pro drives in my newer Synology NAS. My older NAS has an expansion unit hooked to it, so there's 8 12 terabyte Iron Wolf drives and 5 12 terabyte Iron Wolf drives and 5 8 terabyte Iron Wolf drives. That's all set up as one volume. It's expanded across to the expansion unit running SHR2, which is Synology's hybrid RAID, the one that gives a 2-fault tolerance. I can lose 2 drives, and that NAS is strictly to back up regularly, automatically from my main NAS. I'm less concerned about expanding the volume to the other unit on that than I would be on my main NAS that holds my working Plex media. So the real question is, how much of your 4K media do you want to share, and how much of it will not end up being viewed by your own friends and family in 4K? Because some, if not most of it, will end up being transcoded anyway. If you rip your own UHD optical disc and don't convert them, you'll have a very high bitrate 4K movie collection, while someone else might be grabbing a conversion that's still a 4K copy with a significantly lower bitrate of maybe around 20 or 25 megabits per second instead of 100 or higher. So this means that none of us can really say the word 4K media without a bunch of other qualifiers also being involved to describe exactly what type of 4K media we have. And even if we say 1-to-1 rips, the bit rate of your 1-to-1 rip of this movie isn't going to equal exactly my rip or your own 1-to-1 rip of a different movie. Those bit rates are just going to both be high, but one might be 65 and one might be 99. So even that's not equal. There's some server owners that take the position that they are going to rip or collect, that all they're going to rip or collect is the highest quality 4K media they can find because hard drives are cheap, right? And then they build the biggest and baddest and most powerful Plex server they can find with the best NVIDIA GPU or the latest Intel i9 CPU with its fancy iGPU, just for the bragging rights to be able to transcode it to their friends and family. But what's usually left out of that story is how many users they have, because they're not going to transcode past their bandwidth limitations. And how many of these people have 5 gig fiber service? How many of these people have 2.5 gig fiber service? Even with 1 gig fiber service, how many 100 megabit per second streams are you going to serve out? You're not going to serve 20 of them before things start to transcode. So I don't know. It's the 4K question is just loaded. How many you can do? Well, if somebody only reads the software transcoding Plex support article, oh, you've got to have a Plex mark of this level, and they'll argue that to the death because they don't realize there's such a thing as hardware accelerated transcoding. It's such a loaded question. So I do have to test my current system. I've never tested that. When I first joined this group and others, there were a lot of people that poo-pooed the idea of a Synology something 20 plus NAS. The 220 plus, I think there was a 420 plus, the 720 plus, the 920 plus, and the 1520 plus like I have, all have the same 9th gen Celeron with the same iGPU in it. And there's a lot of people that just claim, oh, that was underpowered, that was, got to get a real server, blah, blah, blah. Oh, you can't transcode 4K media. And I'd say, yes, you can. And then it'd be like, oh, you can't transcode 4K H.265 media. Well, if you go to Plex's NAS compatibility guide, you can't transcode H.265 or HEVC 4K media to a lower resolution and in the H.265 or HEVC container. It has to change it to an H.264 container. And people misread that chart and think it's not capable of transcoding when that iGPU is very capable of transcoding. Well, I've got news for them. Take a more modern Intel CPU and see what an HEVC 4K transcoder gets turned into when you convert it to 720p. So there's tons of misinformation, and the only place to get the right information is either from Plex's own support documents, and I know that's the only thing you've been staring at while I've been running my mouth, or Plex's forums. Misinformation can get spread on Facebook groups or on Reddit. There's a lot of good information in both areas. There's a lot of piss-poor information too. But usually, that piss-poor information gets put out pretty quickly, or it gets washed away pretty quickly at Plex's forums. There's a lot of good, dedicated people answering questions in the forums. And of course, there's Plex employees who can chime in with the ultimate authority. Someone to follow in the forums is Chuck PA. He's like the resident Plex Linux expert. He can tell you anything you need to know. He can look through your log files and tell you exactly what's going on with your server and solve just about any problem. So one of my earlier videos on YouTube was to dispel the myth that these older Synology NASs, well, they're back from 2020. They're not really old, but they use a 9th gen Celeron processor, which is older. I think, that's a 2009 18, 19 processor. Well, I wanted to dispel the myth that they could transcode 4K media. So I took the highest bit-rated 4K media I had at the time. It was an H.265 video. And I started up different client devices. And I think at the time, I may have only had one NVIDIA Shield, and the rest of my devices were my tablet and Fire Sticks. Well, I got up to 5 transcoded streams, and they're all transcoded down to 720p before a 6th stream started to buffer and cause 1 or 2 other streams to buffer. But there were still a couple streams that weren't buffering at that, but that was the limit. That was where things started to fall apart, and that's on that old 9th gen Celeron with the UHD Graphics 600 chipset. So I need to try the same thing with the Iris Xe iGPU in my little 11th gen i5 NUC. I bet I make it to 10. I'd put serious money that I'd make it to 10 streams, and I might bet non-serious money that I might even hit 15 streams. You don't know, but at most I can come up with 10 devices at home when my other son who lives with me is at work by using his PC, his tube-style NVIDIA Shield. I have my first 2017 NVIDIA Shield in my bedroom, so that's 3. I've got a tube-style Shield in my office, for that's 4. The HTPC client app on my Linux desktop is 5. The my Linux laptop is 6. My NVIDIA Shield Pro on my Sony TV is 7. And then I have a 2nd gen ONN device on an old TV in the basement, so that's 8. I've got my Google Pixel 6 Pro cell phone, that's 9. And I have my OnePlus Pad tablet, that's 10. So theoretically, I can get 10 streams going all at once to test out that iGPU, and I probably should do it just to know where it's going to crap out. The decision is to use the same stream so everything's equal, or similar streams to break it up. But that's a test I'll probably do eventually. But again, if that 9th gen Celeron processor could handle 5 streams before a 6 stream broke it up, I'm quite sure I'm going to pass 10 streams. Will I pass 15? Who knows? But the question is, why would you want to serve up 15 transcoded 4K streams anyway? Why would you want your server to work that hard? For bragging rights? Especially when a 1080p version of the same movie whose bitrate is 6 or 10 megabits per second is going to look better than that 4K stream transcoded down to 4 megabits per second at 720p or whatever happens on their end to get the stream through. So that's a test I think I'll have to do. It's worth doing. And it really doesn't matter whether it's remote or local. The only issue with remote or local is bandwidth. The only issue with remote or local is client device compatibility. If you've got a fabulous outgoing connection to the internet, well, remote streams like a local stream. It doesn't really matter. So, seeing I'll be forcing the streams into transcode anyway, a local test is equal to a remote test because my outgoing bandwidth is so high anyway. And then the thing to remember is a potato of a server, a Raspberry Pi 4 or 5, can serve up as many direct streams as you throw out at it 24/7. It'll just keep chugging along. Plex is not resource intensive when it's serving up direct streams. It's just not. So that potato, if it has the bandwidth, that potato of a server, if it has the bandwidth, can serve up as many 4K streams as you can throw at it until either the server runs out of outgoing bandwidth to remote clients, or you add a client device that's not compatible with the media. The minute that happens, because the server is a potato and can't transcode one stream, everything's going to stop when it hits that one stream it can't transcode. So, again, to say how many 4K streams can your servers serve up in the first place, it's a loaded question that has no answer until you get all these other parameters locked in and you're comparing my server to your server that may be similar or may not be similar. I actually streamed pretty easily with my older Synology NAS, and that only had an HD Graphics 500 iGPU before my collection was bigger, because it streamed the same way. I was only having to serve up audio transcodes. The video container part of the movie or episode wasn't transcoding because my media was basically easy to stream and compatible even with a cheap Roku device, except for the audio. So even that older Synology NAS with the older iGPU, back then it handled 5, 6, 7, 8 users, and there was no issue with it. I originally bought an NVIDIA Shield in 2018, about 6 months before I bought the first NAS in March of 2019, and I knew I wanted to share with a few people at that point, and that was a horrendous experience. It wasn't the best device to learn Plex on, and that's what made me pull the trigger on the Synology NAS, and luckily because I really hadn't read too much about Plex, but I did research transcoding a little bit, hardware accelerated transcoding, because a bunch of people in this and other groups were saying those servers could hardware transcode a bunch of little streams, a handful of streams easily, but they didn't go beyond that. So I got lucky with that hardware purchase, and I just fell in love with the Synology ecosystem. So this is really long, but there's a Plex support document that answers any question anyone could have. It really doesn't have to be hit or miss advice. And if I search, I probably could have been doing this right along. So let's just do transcode. We won't put an E because we'll limit ourselves. So direct play, direct stream, transcoding overview, transcoding media, server settings, bandwidth, and transcoding limits. These are all good support articles to read. Media naming, I don't have to search for that. I know where that is. Too many people think, oh, my media is named Plex compliant, when it really isn't. These are great articles to learn by heart, and so are these. Everything with these are all based on organizational structure and file naming. A music library is not. It's based on the metadata inside. Well, with all the default settings, if you just add a music library or a TV or movie library without changing anything, then what I'm saying applies. Of course, you can force these two libraries to use local metadata. I don't know why you'd want to. A music library by default looks to the embedded metadata in each song, and you can group 10 songs in an album, and they can all go with that album. But if 4 of those songs originally came from other albums by that artist, and that's the metadata in those songs, no matter how many times you put it in the same folder, they're going to scan as different albums that are all incomplete in Plex because it's scanning based on the local metadata, which is where Music Brain's Picard comes in to inject better metadata if you've got a sloppy, self-made album like I'm talking about. There's just all kinds of things to learn here. Everything you need to know, you can learn. And about the first year of my Plex server experience, once I bought my first Synology NAS, I was the bonehead who needed a dope slap because I did almost everything wrong. Part of my justification for buying the better NAS was I knew I was into Plex big time. I knew I had caught the Plex crack-like addiction, and I knew I needed a backup solution that I was going to use. Expensive to buy more hard drives, expensive to buy another NAS, but like I said, I love the ecosystem. And I kept everybody on the old NAS, and step by step, I moved media over to a new holding folder on the new NAS, and I renamed everything with Filebot to get my descriptive file names that a lot of you've seen. I put media characteristics like H.265, 6-channel, AC, audio. I put 4 different media characteristics into my file names so I could just look at a file and know what I have. And Filebot will also tell me if I have embedded English or unknown subtitles, and that gets added to the file name, all in a Plex compliant way. In my first 8-9 months of Plexing, I discarded any subtitles I came by. So moving to the new NAS was an opportunity for me to slowly go through all my media at that point and maybe upgrade movies that only had a stereo soundtrack or stereo audio track to 5.1, find subtitles, get them to match. So I worked on things slowly, and someone convinced me that it was okay to use sort libraries inside a movie library folder. So I had a sort library for Bond movies. I had one for Marvel movies. I had one for Star Trek movies. I had one for crime. I had one for comedy. I had one for Bourne. I had a sort folder for everything because I thought, oh, this is cool to organize. Hard stop. I've now got 6,500 individual movie folders in my main movie library. They're all alphabetized. It's easy to find. I know we're getting past transcoding, but let me show you. People say, how can you scroll through 6,500 folders? Well, it's pretty darn easy. Pretty darn easy. And you can use sorting to your advantage. So my media shared folder for Plex is named simply Plex. This is a test install on this NAS with Plex installed as a package, and this is a test shared media folder for this and for a Docker container that's a test install. But my unraid NUC points back to this folder. And I use a simple sort folder for each library type. I got a movie library sort folder, a music library sort folder, a photo. We all know what this is. This is a Star App acquisition folder, and that needs to be in this same shared folder to enable atomic moves if you've got that type of setup. I've got to get rid of this. That shouldn't be there. And here's a TV library sort folder and a video sort folder. So if I go into this movie folder, here are my actual movie library folders. I have a stand-up one. This isn't anything I'm using. I keep my pre-rolls here to find them easily. I've got performing arts like ballet and live theater musicals and operas and that kind of stuff, that type of library. My small 4K, my main movie, a kids, one for DVR that I don't use, a documentary, a concerts, and I still have some media here that doesn't have proper entries in the IMDb or the movie database. But if you go into this, 6,500 folders load over my network fast, and geez, I want to get to the T's. Doesn't take that long. And I absolutely hate people that think they have to do something like best man, comma, the. You're not reinventing the library system, and none of these type of movies are entered at IMDb or the movie database that way, so you're just messing yourself up. So you want to see what movies you added last, you sort for it. You want to see the oldest ones, you sort for it with modified. It's very easy. And I don't have to use the Synology interface to get to all of them. If I'm traveling to see my grandkids in South Carolina, I might still add media to the server. I might set up an acquisition through one of the, well, it's not really a Star app, maybe NZB Hydra. It downloads to a different folder in the same shared media folder. I can quickly rename it at a base level, and I can add it to this folder. My server will scan it, and when I get home, anything I've added in this folder gets renamed properly with Filebot, and then I put it where it belongs. So I keep some things in this non-compliant folder because these are all colorized versions, and I also have the non-colorized version, the original version, in my main movie library. My custom expression in Filebot will pick up on any tag in the folder or file name, any traditional addition tag, but it won't pick up this colorized tag. So if I wanted to run Filebot on all my library files down the road because I came up with a better expression, these all have to be done manually. So if I created a new folder structure, these would just get mixed in. But if I just did this folder by itself, I could then manually add back in the addition tag to the file names pretty quickly. So that's why that's separate. And what else do I have separate? I happen to like this performance of the Nutcracker. It's not in any database, and it's in my Christmas collection in this movie library, because I just think it's a better Christmas special performance than a regular ballet version. That's not in a database, so I keep that separate because it can't be named by Filebot. So then everything from here on out gets its own folder, and if I want to move along slower, I just use the arrow key. If I want to move along instantly, it doesn't take too long to go find the movie you want. And because they're alphabetized, they're easy to find. So we're really far afield of 4K videos, but this is my small 4K collection. This is a high bitrate movie. You can see by the file size. Oh, and this is how my Filebot expression names movies. Now, I put things in brackets, and it's really not a rule with a Plex movie library. In a Plex series library, anything in brackets at the end gets ignored by the scanner. I expect this to be an eventual rule for a Plex movie library, but it may not be. But I'm using Plex's versioning naming scheme, which is where this space dash space comes in. It could be a plain period, but you can't use a period to replace natural spaces, and you can't use an underscore. But if you look up Plex's versioning document, you'll see examples like this. I prefer the look of space dash space. So anything after the period or the space dash space can be named anything you want. So that's why I add the brackets in. A bracket for the media characteristics, and then another set of brackets if there's embedded English subtitles or unknown subtitles. Most of the media I come across with unknown subtitles are still English subtitles, but whoever ripped it did not flag it as an English language subtitle in the media container folder. So that tells me when I'm renaming something that I then have to take it to MKV Toolnix to open it up, which is just unzipping the container, flagging it, and when I zip the container back up, there's a new copy left over. It happens fast, and then I can disregard the original copy, run it through Filebot again, or just manually add this, because that's what Filebot will do on the second pass, and keep with my convention. I like looking at a file name and just knowing what I've got. And, you know, an older movie, there's not a stereo audio channel for this, even though I think it's been remastered to 4K. So if I go down to my other high bitrate movie, get down to the T's, well, I am not sorted alphabetically. This is another test movie I use a lot because the bit rate exceeds 100 megabits per second. And you'll see this one's an HEVC 6-channel DTS with English subs. So, all right, I've gone on and on. I've gone on too long. Now I'm doubtful if I'll even post this long thing. But I just didn't want to try to type about 4K because I'd have to use 2 or 3 boxes to post in on Facebook, and you've got to be really interested in Plex to listen to all this anyway, but some people are, so consider this like my first live cast or something where I just ramble on about some Plex subjects. So happy Plexing, and if you get to the end of this and still want to watch more videos, definitely let me know. If you got complaints, I'm just some guy trying to help out other Plex server owners. I've got my style, and my style is like your neighbor from 2 or 3 houses down the road from you that you kind of like, but you'll put up with a lot because he knows way more about Plex than you do. So my ums and ahs and my misspoken words occasionally are just water under the bridge because you're after some Plex knowledge you don't have that I happen to have. And what's fun about Plex is I'm still learning new things myself. So happy Plexing. Thanks for watching. And 4K is a whole can of worms. And almost anybody that says the word 4K, they're meaning something different than if I say the word 4K. But that's okay. Plex is designed to have your way, so have it your way. Take care.